Well, again, today's just random topic day, somewhat random. And this is one, and the next one will be, again, a little bit biblically oriented, but kind of a different take on things. I'm willing to bet that what we'll go through here in this session will be something that you have not heard before with respect to all the wrangling over creation versus evolution and all this, the talk about Genesis. What I want to introduce you to is really the way Hebrew scholars, the way Old Testament scholars talk about how to interpret Genesis 1. This is what they're talking about, as opposed to, let's talk about what the Hebrew word for day, yom, means. Is it 24 hours or is it something else? That's the sort of thing that orients the popular discussion. And that's an issue that is of secondary importance and frankly, in my view, not a whole lot of relevance in certain respects to the whole discussion about creation, how do we read Genesis and all this sort of thing. So what you'll see here is, again, what the way scholars, believing scholars and otherwise, would talk about Genesis 1. And it also, again, will be part of the discussion as to why more than one view of the creative activity of Genesis 1 is possible from the biblical text. Okay, what we're going to talk about here has nothing to do, zero to do with science. Okay? This is just, what does the text say? It's inspired in Hebrew, that ought to matter. What does the grammar of Genesis 1 through 3 tell us? And don't get scared because it's grammar. I think this will be quite understandable for you. So the peripheral issues are the meaning of bara. Okay? This whole argument bara is about creation from nothing. That is demonstrably not true when it comes to exegesis. How do we know that? Real simple. Genesis 1:26, let us create humankind in our image. The verb for create there is bara. Well, we know that Adam and Eve were not created from nothing, don't we? Genesis 2 has Adam being created from the dust of the ground, and it also has Eve being created from the side of Adam. Both human beings are created from pre-existing material, and yet they're described with bara. That alone tells you bara, the word that occurs in Genesis 1:1, the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, does not mean creation from nothing. But you'll read that all over the place. It's just not true. It's not true from the biblical text. We're not going to worry about that. We're not going to worry about yom. Again, hey, yom, when accompanied by a numeral, has to be 24 hours. That's also not true. But again, who cares? This is where the rubber meets the road, right here. The clause structure of Genesis 1 through 3, and I can already see clauses, using grammatical terms. How am I going to make it through this hour? Okay, trust me. Just trust me. You'll do okay. What is a clause? If you remember back to English class, a clause is a group of related words containing a subject and a verb. It's a complete thought. Okay, subject, verb, subject, predicate. That's all it is. It may or may not express a complete thought. There may be peripheral things, but it has a subject and a predication. So in that sense, it's complete. Most clauses that are, independent clauses will have a completion, a complete idea. Others may be dependent on something else to complete their thought. Verb to be expressed or not present, just understood. We do this in English, when we omit subjects or verbs because we could just do that. If I look at Will and say, come here, well, the nonverbal communication completes the idea. I'm talking to him. You come here. I didn't even use the subject, but I can do that. And Hebrew works the same way. Now here's what we're talking about with clauses. Really two types. Independent clause, it's a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, subject and a predicate, and completes a thought as a complete thought. Here's an example. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. That is a complete thought. We have a subject, Jim, here's our predication, studied, and then we have extra circumstances added to it. The thought is complete. You don't need anything else to help you understand what's going on. It's complete in and of itself. Real simple. That's an independent clause. It doesn't need any help. Dependent clauses are a group of words that contain a subject and a verb, but does not express a complete thought. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, you know intuitively that it's not complete. You need something added to it to get the full picture. There's something missing. It needs help to complete the idea. You notice all I did here was add the word when. I took a complete independent clause and I made it dependent by just putting the word when in front of it. I've added a circumstance that I haven't told you about. That's why it's incomplete. It depends on something else I'm going to say. It does not stand by itself. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, and again, there you have the difference. Just one word. So let's take that sentence, and here's how we would complete it. So we have a dependent clause. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, he was able to concentrate. That completes the idea. I added something at the end. Or I could add something at the beginning. His brother stayed away when Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. Okay, that makes this when temporal, and it adds a circumstance that, okay, I understand now what the full picture is. So again, add something at the end or at the beginning. The key issue here is it needs help. Some clauses don't need help, others do. Now, independent or dependent, which is necessary for knowing? What is the main idea and what modifies or describes what? When you string clauses together, you need to know which ones are independent, which ones stand alone, express a complete thought, and which ones are the helpers. Look at this sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that reads like a complete independent thought, correct? It can function pretty well on its own. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And this is just Genesis 1:1-3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now I have deliberately omitted certain punctuation marks because of what we're going to talk about. Here we have 3 verses right here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. You'll notice it's in blue. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is one way that the first 3 verses could be read. Where verse 2, okay, has to be helped, has to be supplemented in some way to know what its role is. Because when you put the word now out front, now the earth was without form and void, it makes you think, well, there was something prior here that I need to help me understand this statement. I need what comes before. So we would say verse 2, okay, is either dependent on or a circumstance to or needs help from the first verse. This is the traditional way that Genesis 1:1-3 is read. We have the first act of creation. We have a circumstance that is sort of the result of the first verse, and then verse 3 comes along and starts adding to the story. it's read sort of linearly, if that's a word. It's a linear reading. So we have, again, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, complete thought. Now the earth was without form and void. Okay, that assumes the first verse we've read. And it, this thought here is sort of a little interruption, a little circumstance, a result of verse 1. And then verse 3, God starts doing something. First creative act, second creative act. This is the traditional way to look at the verses. What if I translated the first verse this way? When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now does that stand alone like this does? No. Because it's leading to something. It's not complete. You say, well, Mike, that's cheating. You can't just change the words of the Bible. Well, let's see. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Complete thought. The Hebrew is these consonants. Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav. You'll notice this mark I added, that's a vowel mark. It's the letter A, but it's also a definite article. So to translate Genesis 1:1 this way as an independent clause, a complete thought, not dependent on anything, to say in the beginning, you need the Hebrew text to look like this and have this first vowel. If it was when God began to create, you wouldn't have this, you would have these two little dots. This makes the whole phrase dependent. Now here's your Jeopardy question. Which one do you think is actually in the Hebrew Bible? It's actually this one. The first word of Genesis in all pointed Hebrew manuscripts known to exist is Bereshit, not Ba-Reshit. If it was this, then this is the way we should translate it, because we have to account for the definite article. The word the in Hebrew, that's what the definite article is. We actually don't have the definite article in the Hebrew text. So here's what that means. You should try to translate this without using the word the. Go ahead, give it a try. In beginning, at beginning. The only way you can really do it is to take the preposition here and make it when. But if you do that, then Genesis 1:1 is not the first creative act in Genesis 1:1-3. It just describes a circumstance leading to the first creative act. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, some stuff was going on. Okay? We haven't gotten to yet what God actually does, his first act. See, this makes the verb, you have to translate it, created. This makes creation an act of creation because it's a definite point in time. This one still has creation waiting to sort of happen. God has to get busy yet. We're leading to something. This is actually what you have in the Hebrew Bible. Now again, your typical creation apologist is not going to know this. If he does it, he's not going to tell you probably, because it muddies the waters. But let's see what the effect is. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light. Now you have the first two verses as a circumstance setting up the third verse. You see the subtle difference? This is your independent thought. These both verses are dependent, and they are setting up this one. This is your first creative act in Genesis 1:1-3. Not 1:1, but 1:3. Is your first creative, display of power. You say, well, what's the difference? What's the effect of this? Again, the Hebrew syntax view. How does that affect the way we understand what's going on? Well, the traditional view reads the first three verses as a chronological sequence. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. The result was the earth was formless and empty. That's the way it was created, because it was created back here, and this was the result. And then God's second act was let there be light, and there was light. The alternative says, well, when God began to create the heavens and the earth, here were the conditions. Here's what was going on. The earth was, at that moment, formless and empty. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering. And then God said, let there be light. Do you realize the implications? When God sort of steps up to the plate to start creating, which he's going to do down here, there's already pre-existing material. Now it begs the question, where'd that come from? Okay. It's a whole different perspective. Now where it came from is answered in other verses. Colossians 1, that God is, he created all things visible and invisible. Okay, that pretty much covers like everything. You don't get the answer in Genesis 1. You have to go outside Genesis 1 to say, well, God was responsible for this too. It's just that he must have done this earlier, and then, at some point after he did this, God sort of returns to work and says, well, now let's get busy. Let's take that stuff that's already there and start forming and fashioning it for human habitation. Let's make it cool. Let's make it so that we can create humans and have them live on it, enjoy it, and all that kind of stuff. The thing is, if you look at it this way, this is already existing, and you don't know how much time has elapsed between this activity and this activity. There is no way to posit a time sequence. You could have billions and billions, I sound like Carl Sagan now, billions of years in between these two things. So this stuff, the formless and empty earth, could have been around for billions of years before God gets busy and says, now it's time to go to work again. Now it's time to bring humanity into the equation. And they got to live somewhere. We're going to take what's right here, and we're going to make it fit for human habitation. Now, after this event, you go into the rest of Genesis 1, and then you can start talking about, well, is it 24-hour days? Is it something else? Then the discussion becomes meaningful. But even if you decide you've got a sequence of 6 24-hour days after this event, you could still have billions of years before it. The Hebrew Bible is not definite in terms of its time sequence. It just isn't. I don't write the stuff, I just read it. Okay? That's the way it is. So this is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to beginning the discussion of long ages and the scientific theories about origins of the earth. That's the first time I mentioned science. Okay? I'm doing Hebrew. That's what I do. Okay? I don't really care about science until I get to some later point. Is the point. So again, just to summarize that, Genesis 1:1 is not the absolute beginning. According to Hebrew grammar, Genesis 1:1-3 describes an ordering or refashioning of matter that was already existing when God began to work. Now, again, you can talk about bara all you want. I'm not going to go through this. I already gave you the verbal explanation here. Bara, humanity. Well, humanity is not created from out of nothing. Pre-existing material right here. Same thing in Exodus 20:11. There you have the heavens and the earth described with a different verb. not bara. Okay, asa, God made heavens and the earth. And asa is used elsewhere for creation, creative activity using pre-existing material. And that's actually what you see in the first 3 verses of Genesis. But again, this isn't the typical way this is talked about. I hate to say this, but I understand why there's the concern with, ages of time and evolution and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But if you think that Scripture, if you think that Genesis was inspired and God used Hebrew to do that, you might want to pay attention to the language. It just might. But typically, again, in churches and in popular apologetics and websites, you're not going to get anywhere near this. You're never going to hear it. Because they just don't do that. They use these secondary arguments and then create a battle. Where if you just paid attention to it, it might help you. It might help, well, it sort of takes that eons of time thing sort of right off the table, because that's not opposing to the Bible. The Bible doesn't oppose that idea. It presumes it in the first 3 verses. Now we still have to talk about, okay, what happens afterward, and then you get into discussion about the words and that sort of thing. But you're sometimes we're fighting unnecessary battles. Yom, I'll click out to these because some of you have probably heard this. Yom with a numeral must mean 24 hours. Actually, it doesn't. Wait till that loads. Go offline here. What you're going to find with both of these, hopefully this will open quickly. Forgot to open it. There we go. What you're going to find with both references, 31:23, is that the word with a numeral has some elasticity to it. So this is the Jacob and Laban story. And so Jacob is running away, from Laban. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued Jacob, for 7 days. Now here we have, again, to show you, there's the word day. It's Yom. Preceding it is a numeral. Now here's the question. Did Laban and his men really pursue Jacob for 7 consecutive 24-hour cycles? Did they not sleep for 7 consecutive days? Did their animals were they able to run and pursue for 7 consecutive 24-hour periods? Or does it just mean, when it was daytime, they were on their horses and chasing after the guy? It's kind of absurd to think that they didn't sleep for 7 consecutive 24-hour periods, and that the animals could do that. Another example. Jacob and Esau. This is when they finally meet, after being estranged for so many years. Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." He wants, Jacob to come back with him in his place. Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me." I'm kind of worried about them. If they are driven hard for 1 day, all the flocks will die. So is Jacob really saying, well, you know what? What Esau is asking me is to have the kids get up and walk, and of course the herds, for 24 hours. Is that really what he's thinking? Hey, hope you all slept before we're starting, because we're not going to sleep for another 24 hours. We're going to walk round the clock for 24 hours. Come on. Okay, that is not what's in view here. So what I'm doing here is, again, just showing you exceptions to the discussion that you probably don't get to hear, because people in this debate are just used, on both sides, are just used to defending turf. And there's a lot more variability here and a lot more flexibility, not with science. I'm not a scientist, okay? I'm talking about in the text. There is interpretive flexibility here that ought to be part of the discussion and might help soften the rhetoric a little bit. I would hope. The other thing that you're dealing with, and I don't know if you want to go into this or if you want to, it's 1 to 40. I'll just tell you sort of where I'm at on this. Despite what we just went through with Genesis 1 through 3, my own position on this is that a lot of the discussion, I don't know a better way to put this, but a lot of the discussion really doesn't matter. What matters is affirming a creator. Okay, we're not monists. I'm not a monist. There is a distinction between the creator and the creation, and we are accountable to the creator in all sorts of ways. Okay, that's the issue. I don't think the Bible is here to teach us science in any regard. That's not its purpose. It's written by pre-scientific people that God selected. God knew what he was getting when he tapped someone on the shoulder living in 1500 BC and said, hey, I want you to write something. He knows he's not getting Stephen Hawking. Okay, he knows who they are, and these are God's decisions. Frankly, if God inspired Genesis today and he picked Stephen Hawking, you know what would happen? Hawking would give us this discourse about what, the Big Bang or all this other stuff that happens. And you know what? 1,000 years from now, someone would read what he wrote and think, what a dope. What a dope. Can you believe they believed this back in the 21st century about cosmology? Because 1,000 years from now, or 2,000 years from now, our knowledge of science is going to be well beyond where it is today. And if you wrote Genesis today, the writer would look like an idiot. He would look imprecise. He would look unscientific. If you're going to judge the Bible by science, there is never a point when you're going to be satisfied with it, or that you can be satisfied with it, because science changes constantly. Now God knows that. It's not an observation on that's so brilliant. Okay, this is just life. It's just the way it is. So God knew what he was getting in 1500 BC. He didn't say, now I want you to write a science book. I want you to explain in scientific detail the creation so that 3,000 years from now, people will pick it up and go, wow, what insight. They knew modern cosmology way back then. That's not the point. How do we know that? We know it from lots of ways. There's pre-scientific thinking in the Bible in lots of places. The seat of human thought and emotions were said to be the kidneys or the intestines or the innards or whatever. Now, we know why that is expressed, because when we have thoughts and feelings and emotions, you do feel it there, right? And you have a visceral response, there's this mind-body thing going on. We've all experienced that. But we also know that where the seat of the emotions, where our emotions really come from, and the seat of the intellect is right up here. This is where they come from, your brain. And your nervous system affects other parts of your body based upon what's going on up here. There is no biblical Hebrew word for brain, because they didn't know that, again, the seat of your emotions, the seat of the intellect, the seat of your inner life, they didn't know it wasn't from here, but that's what they could feel in everyday experience. They didn't know that it was centers in your brain. We do. And we have a very secure knowledge of that. You can shut it off and turn it on. We know that for good. Absolutely. It's just, that's what it is. Hebrews 7 is interesting. This is the passage that talks about Levi paying tithes to Melchizedek while he was yet in the loins of his father. Remember that passage? So the passage is saying, hey, when Abraham met with Melchizedek and he paid Melchizedek a tithe, And Melchizedek is a superior priestly line, because that's the priestly line that Jesus is going to come from. His point is that the line of Melchizedek is superior to Levi. In fact, Levi, instead of getting tithes, according to Old Testament law, from all like the Levites did from all the other tribes, instead of getting tribes from Melchizedek, Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek while he was still in the loins of his father, before he was even born. Do you realize what that says? It says that a complete human person exists in the male. Okay, we all know where babies come from. They're not the male. There is never a human being that exists as a person in the male. That can only happen with women, okay, after fertilization. Okay, because we believe that the contents of the womb is a whole person, and that's a very biblical view. But here, they add this thought that Abraham's ancestors were somehow floating around in him, or in his sperm or something. Okay, we know where babies come from. Sperm does not have a person in it. It has to be joined genetically with the genetic material of the woman. This is why we can do artificial insemination. This is, again, we know where babies come from. In the biblical world, it was thought that men implanted the seed, the person, in the woman, and there it would grow. It's a planting metaphor. It's an agricultural metaphor. This is why in the Bible, infertility is never a male problem. Well, I know it worked. I remember when we did it, and you got implanted, and if we don't have children, you're infertile. God's cursing you or something. They don't know about male sterility. They're not biologists. They're not geneticists. So the women always get blamed, because that's just the way it looks to the human eye. That's the only explanation they can offer. God's not enabling you to grow this kid inside. Maybe there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong between you and God. It's never, I must be sterile. I better get that checked out. They have no idea. None. We won't go into this. This is pretty R-rated stuff. And this is going to sound really goofy, but it's true for the ancient world. The whole hair length passage in 1 Corinthians 11, the woman having her head covered, it was believed, and you can look at the medical text of Hippocrates. You remember the Hippocratic oath that doctors take today? Hippocrates and others who predate the biblical period believed that a woman's hair aided her in fecundity, in being able to conceive. The longer a woman's hair was, it would draw the sperm. This is kind of crazy. It would draw the sperm where it needed to go to conceive. It was somehow an agent that worked with sperm, with the male component, to conceive a child. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. But Hippocrates goes on these long treatises. Here's one of his tests for infertility. He would give a woman it wasn't a pill, but he'd give her something to eat that had a distinct odor to it. Okay, and so, you would eat this with the idea that in 24 hours' time, if I can't smell it, then it must have been drawn into the body sufficiently, specifically down here. This is where babies are. Okay? And so, if I can't smell it the next day, then everything's working right. Then you're fertile. But if I can, then there's something wrong. You're infertile. And you say, that is lunacy. It is. But these are medical texts from the Greco-Roman period. And some of the vocabulary in the medical texts shows up in 1 Corinthians 11 when it talks about head coverings. It is about as far away from medical science as you can get. But it was common belief. And Paul, again, talks about it with the hair and all that stuff. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about fertility, he's talking about sexual behavior, he's talking about modesty, really. Except when he gets to the part of, you do this, you have your head covered because of the angels. We don't even want to go there. And that goes back to the Genesis 6 story. Okay, again, it's part of the story. It's part of the worldview. Now, what did they believe? Israelite cosmology is very transparent. They believed what, frankly, everybody else believed in the ancient world about what the world was, except for one key difference. The world was not created by the gods or by gods splitting in half or by gods having baby gods. They don't believe any of that. The world, as we know it, was created by Yahweh. Okay? But what they thought about the world was, again, pre-scientific. So, again, it's a very typical view. Let me just show you real quickly, run through this real quickly. Ancient cosmology had a three-tiered worldview. You have heavens above, earth beneath, the water that is under the earth. Exodus 20. The New Testament has the same idea. Therefore God has highly exalted him, bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven, in earth, or under the earth. Three-tiered cosmology. Revelation 2:5, no one in heaven, or earth, or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look upon it. All these regions are inhabited. Heavens, earth, and under the earth, which was, again, kind of a sinister place. Here's what biblical cosmology actually looks like. You have the earth is flat and round, it's a circle. It's encased by a dome, which is solid. The stars are affixed to the dome. There are windows and doors of heaven that release water. There's water above the firmament, above the earth, above the dome. Okay, and this is where God lives, above it all. Underneath there's Sheol, which is a watery abyss. It's also the place of the afterlife. The whole idea that hell is like down there comes from ancient cosmology. Okay, we still use some of this vocabulary. Look at some of the verses. Genesis 1:6. Let there be an expanse, rakia, firmament, in the midst of the waters. Okay? Let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse. Okay, the waters under the dome here, down here on earth, from the waters that were above it. Right here. And this is very common in the ancient Near East. God called the expanse heaven, the sky. Okay. Waters above the heavens. Proverbs 8. When he, God, established the heavens, I was there. Wisdom is speaking here. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above. Okay, amatz, it's the same verb that you'll see in Isaiah 44:14 for a tree being solid and firm. So when God made the skies firm above, Job 37, same idea. Can you, O Job, like God, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror? So you could go up in the ancient Israelites thought, you get high and you could knock on the thing. They thought it was solid. Everybody did. Thick clouds veil him. God lives above all this. He walks on the vault of heaven. Anthropomorphic language again. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. Okay, over the waters that are up here. Yeah, this is their world. From God's eye, looking down, here's the earth, and there's water all around. Okay, this is where the horizon ends and where the dome is going to sort of collapse on everything and hold the waters tight. Okay, and look at some of the language in the Bible. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. Well, how can you have waters, plural, in one place? And how can you call those waters seas? This is how. You have various seas around the different geographic zones of the earth, but yet they're in one place. That's how you do it. Proverbs 8, he drew a circle on the face of the deep. Job, he has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. Where's the boundary between light and darkness? It's the horizon. It's where the sun sets, sun rises. Light, dark. It's naked eye observation. That's all it is. This is their world. This is how they understand it. But there's no theological ambiguity, because they're going to credit the God of Israel for doing this instead of other gods and having baby gods, and what all the polytheistic systems do. Again, pillars of heaven, foundations of the heavens, windows of the heavens, doors of the heavens, pillars of the earth. He set the world on the pillars of the earth, foundation of the earth. On what were its bases sunk? Set the earth on its foundations. He spreads out the earth above the waters. This is their world. Okay? We don't want a rabbit trail into Sheol with the Rephaim and all that stuff. That's part of the underworld, but let me see if I add anything in summary. No, I don't. But here's what you got. You have God deciding, look, I have an important message for posterity. I want people to know that I created everything they experience. I created the heavens and the earth, all things, everything, visible and invisible. And I am choosing to start this communication in the 2nd millennium BC. God is smart enough to know what he's getting. He is not getting modern scientists, and he doesn't care. Because what he wants them to write, they are perfectly capable of writing using their own language and their own knowledge base, their own worldview, their own cognitive framework. He wants the world to know who the Creator really is, who created humanity, that humanity is accountable to that Creator, since he made them, probably has an interest in what happens to humanity. He probably has a destiny in mind for humanity. He probably has a plan for all this. And he is the one in charge, and his plan is the only one that is going to work. The only one that is going to result in humanity being with him, their Creator, forever. So God says, get that done. Tell people that message. See, the thing is, again, if they would have written it in modern science, if the biblical text in the 2nd millennium BC had somehow encrypted modern science, who would have understood it? The writer wouldn't have even understood it. How are the readers going to understand it? How are readers in 1000 AD going to understand it? If the Bible is supposed to communicate, encrypting information makes it non-communicative. It means that all this time, until the 21st century, or the 20th century, all this time, the people who were reading the Bible didn't understand it and couldn't. But see, now that we're in modern science, we can look at Genesis and get quantum physics in there. We can get all sorts of biological stuff in there. It's absurd. And again, if God had done it that way, 1,000 years from now, people are going to be dissatisfied with it because it will be out of date. If you do it this way, and you just let people use the language they have to communicate very clear theological ideas about who they are, who the Creator is, and what that all means, it doesn't matter if it's written in the 2nd millennium BC, because you can sit there and read it and get the message. 1,000 years from now, they can read it and get the message. This is purposeful on God's part. He knew what he was getting, and he knew what he wanted. But what we've done is we have imported our debates, our questions, our troubles, our controversies, and we have imposed them on the biblical text. That's what we've done. Yeah, the Bible was not written to us, even though it was written for us. It wasn't written to us. Completely different worldview. So what I like to do when I run into people that, scientists, atheists, whatever, and they I think the Bible's just a bunch of nonsense, and why do you feel that way? I think it's just crazy town. Look at what it says about creation and all this stuff. We just know better. The Bible doesn't, it just ignores science. It's unscientific, and I just think it's just a joke. So my first question is this. Why are you angry with the Bible for not being what it was never intended to be? Are you mad at your dog for not being a cat? Are you mad at your son for not being a daughter? It makes no sense. Why are you criticizing something for not being what it was never intended to be? If you can explain how that position, that way of thinking makes any sense, then I'll listen to you. Because right now, your position sounds kind of dumb. And I've actually said that to people. And they look at you like you got two heads. Because they realize, yeah, that is what I'm doing. I'm mad at the thing for not being what I want it to be, what I think it should be. So explain to me, Professor, how does that make sense? What else in life do you approach that way? I'm mad at my chair for not being a table. It's ridiculous. Let the Bible be what it is. It is a pre-scientific, Mediterranean-centered document that gives us theological propositions that cannot be tested by science, but they can be tested for coherence. Does it make sense to have a God as opposed to no God? If there is a God, can that God actually do anything? Well, if that God can do anything, might he have the ability to perish the thought, influence someone to write a sentence? I can do that. Okay, what we believe is actually very, very simple. The existence of God is philosophically more coherent than there not being a God. That's proposition number. That's where it all starts. And if there's a God, can he actually do anything? Because if you start to limit him, then the question is, well, then how do you have God? Does it make more sense? Is creation here because it burped itself into existence? I know I didn't make it, you didn't make it. So did it just spontaneously generate? I learned in 10th grade science that there is no spontaneous generation. Did that change? Okay, matter can either be created or destroyed. Again, these fundamental ideas that, again, within the self-contained system, you have to have something happen. There's an effect called creation, there must be a cause. Okay, what is it? So you test these major ideas in the Bible for coherence, for logical coherence. That's the way you approach it. And that's why I'm a theist. It's also why I'm a Christian, because, hey, lo and behold, not only can God influence somebody to write something, but if he's really God, if he really has creative power, like we see in nature, I'll bet God could become a man if he wanted to. Why can't he? What limits him? If he can do this big thing over here, why is this different? And it's just propositions tested for coherence. It has nothing to do with putting anything under a microscope. So if you play that game, if you let people make the Bible something it wasn't intended to be, if you try to pretend it's a science book, you're going to be a sitting duck. Okay, you're going to have angry debates. You're going to make it look like the Bible is this flawed thing. Okay, that it's trying to live up to this scientific plateau and it can't do it. That's where the critic wants you to go. Okay, that's the sweet spot for them, because they can always find something that isn't precise enough, isn't scientific enough. Okay, that's just the nature of the beast. So again, my own view of a lot of this stuff is, a lot of the discussion, although I know why it's important to people to have, ultimately, I don't think it really matters. There are some that do. Creator, creation thing, all that stuff is important. The gospel is important. These are all truth claims. Are they more coherent than something else? And the good news is that for millennia, people have been asking those questions, and guess what? The gospel is still here. It is still here. And it's alive and it's kicking. It has not been put to rest. It has not been shown to be philosophically incoherent and indefensible. If anything, you have leaders in math and science, in sciences and in logic. Those disciplines are filled with theists and Christians. They are filled. If you don't believe that, I'll give you a website. Go to the American Scientific Affiliation, ASA.org. It's not a young earth creationist site. It's old earthers, creationists. But it is a professional scientific affiliation in all disciplines, and everybody who's a member is a Christian. Thousands of them. Go to cccu.org, Christian College Coalition. Okay, the member schools, there are a few hundred of them. Guess what? They all have physics departments. They all have biology departments. They all have chemistry departments. Guess what? There are real Christians who have PhDs who write in the same journals, write the same science books, went to the same graduate programs, are belonging to the same, professional societies as anybody else who doesn't believe any of it. So the next time someone tells you it's impossible to be a scientist and a Christian, just, politely say, you're just full of it. Okay, you are underinformed, is the polite way to say it. Explain to me why thousands of examples to the contrary to what you just said are real. Explain that. And they have to give you goofy answers. Well, they're all lying. Well, they all just fake their way through. It's just absurd. It descends into absurdity very quickly. So put the onus on them. Explain to me how all these exceptions to what you believe are real. I can go meet these people now that are living contradictions to what you say. Okay, that honestly, that's just more effective. It's just a more effective apologetic than saying, well, the Hebrew word yom means, look, they don't care. They don't care. Give them a question that they have to wrestle with. They don't care because you're appealing to your Bible. Okay, what I just did for you is I appealed to reality. Okay, these people are real. You can meet them, and they'll tell you just what I'm telling you right now. Okay, I don't need to appeal to a religious book. Okay, I want you to answer this question. Go ahead, do it. Again, I'm sorry for the little rabbit trail there, but again, they look at you like you got two heads because what they're expecting is they're expecting you to put or pit religion against their science. Don't play the game. Seriously, don't play the game. Give them a question they have to wrestle with that you want answered. You can answer it, well then, yeah, okay. We've got something to talk about now. Anyway, again, sorry for the rabbit trail there.